Welcome to Look, Listen, Laugh. My guest this episode is Mark Trevorrow. Now, if you don't recognise his name off the bat, you'll know his character, beloved Australian comedic character, Bob Downe. I'm thinking back here, I was a teenager at the time when I first saw him perform. I was sitting in the audience of the Denton TV show, and out comes this character, Bob Downe, and one of the most memorable performances I've ever seen. I always enjoy sitting down and having a chat with Mark, and today we're going to delve into his favourite album, film, and book. So enjoy my conversation with Mark Trevorrow. Well, Mark.
Joel.
Good to see you, my friend.
Lovely to see you.
Here we are on the high seas together.
Here we are on the high seas in the entertainment director's office.
Now, I'm glad that we could figure this out because we've been communicating backwards and forwards about when we could make this work. And I foolishly suggested on one of the days, why don't we do it on this Sunday? And you're like, the Sunday after Mardi Gras. That's a great suggestion, Joel.
I wouldn't have been very bright and breezy, let me tell you.
But
I would have been quite,
Yeah.
I would have looked a bit haggard.
How was it?
And I wouldn't have had much to say.
Yeah, you would have just roll camera, Joel, whatever.
Yeah, I would have been awful.
How was it this year?
Sensational.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always so much fun. Especially because over the years, I've sort of done enough to score backstage passes.
You get all the treatment.
Yeah, and my friend Cindy Pastel, who Priscilla is inspired by, has a viewing area now named after her. So we were there, she was all frocked up, and we were there in one of those enclosed viewing areas along the street that had toilets and bars and food.
Fantastic.
Delightful. Then we went to the party, and our other friend, Maud Boat, who invented the extruded, the sculpted foam headdresses that look like wigs.
Yeah, sure.
That's Maud's invention.
Right.
Maud was in one of the shows with CC Peniston.
Right.
And so we all had backstage passes. And it's the way to go.
Yeah. It's a very now it's so big now too. It's like having that area just as a bit of respite is makes a lot of difference.
No, it was beautiful. I mean, I've lost count of how many Mardi Gras I've done, but it's very rare for me to have time off for good behaviour, as I always put it, which is not to be performing in any role, whether it's a broadcast or performing at the party or hosting or whatever. So I could count on one hand how many Mardi Gras I've had where I don't have to actually perform, and it actually always feels weird.
Yeah. It is a hard thing when you have a gig and there's a performer, a musician, a comedian, or a play or something you really want to go to, and you're like, I'm booked. I can't get out of this.
Yeah, and yet imagine if we were on one of these cruises and we weren't performing, we'd feel just as weird.
Yeah, you're right.
Would we ever be on a cruise where we weren't performing? Actually, you know what? I think I would.
Yeah.
I think I would. I've really grown to love cruising. Before we did the comedy cruises, I had never been on a cruise ship.
Yes.
And I think, if you're of my generation, if you're older than 40 or 50, you've got a sort of there's still a little bit of stigma around the idea of cruises and cruise work.
And it was different back then. But like what we're doing, I think this is why we like it so much. We're on and off in 3 days. We're on with other comedians. It's like a comedy festival on water.
We're
basically
in a guest cabin.
Yeah, we're looked after. We eat well. We get to hang out.
They fly us to wherever we're getting on a ship. But the best thing is hanging out with each other, isn't it? Because as comedians, you're so often on your own on the road, and it's so
solitude.
So lonely.
Yeah.
But then when we're on these comedy cruises, there's another 4 or 5 comics that you're on board with, and they're nice. They're all nice and they're all good, because you don't get the gig unless you are good and you are nice.
Yeah.
If you're an asshole, sorry,
sayonara.
We've got a lot of people waiting.
Yeah, no, that's true.
They're very popular with the comics, aren't they?
Yes.
The cruises.
Yeah, they are. Especially the ones, the ones that we did. We're on and off. Like, how would you be being on here like for a month doing a?
I would be taken off in a straitjacket. Yeah, I'd be removed against my will.
The novelty would wear thin.
Yeah, very much so. I just did my longest one ever. I was at sea for 10 days sailing from Freo to Bali.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for Kay Howe Jackson, who was on, who's a beautiful friend of ours.
She's lovely, yeah.
She was the sit-down comic on board. And my music director, Danny Bourne, who is Shane's brother, who is such a character.
Yeah.
And we have such fun together. And so, in fact, I was sort of dreading it, but then it ended up being like, I only had 2 shows to do in that whole 10 days. And so it ended up being like enforced rest.
Yeah.
And it's actually divine.
Yes.
I read.
Yeah. Yeah, I've found that, catching up on reading, documentaries. It's a...
Podcast, shooting the odd podcast.
Yes, on the high seas.
No, they are really, like, I've been doing them now regularly, you know, with the pandemic in between. Been doing the cruises since 2016, and I do on average about 1 a month or 1 every 6 weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much, Kelly and Megan, for booking me, and I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. And the best thing is we can bring partners or friends.
Yes.
On any cruise we can.
You got married on a cruise.
I got married.
Yes.
We did a marriage celebration. We got married, officially married in San Francisco before it became legal here, early in 2017. But then we did a marriage celebration on board the Pacific Jewel at one of our comedy cruises. And our friends and family just booked cabins.
Great.
We had about 80 people. And it was such an amazing thing because we did it out on the back deck of the of the Jewel. And there was also all the family and friends were around us outside. And then on the balcony were all of the punters on the ship, all the passengers watching the whole thing. And the reaction of those punters on the ship everywhere we went that weekend, this was in April of 2017, we knew what was going to happen with the plebiscite. We knew that it was going to be a massive yes, only because of how unbelievably positive every single person was. And the great thing about these cruises is what a cross-section of Australian society you have on board.
Right, it is. It's a melting pot.
It's like being in the street.
Yeah, it is. I was saying that just looking at the pool today when we were having lunch, looking out through the glass, thinking, wow, this is such a crossbreed of people. Like,
3 generations of families.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And for me too, you know, when I do the longer cruises where I do my solo show with a band, the average age of people cruising is very suitable for me because I've been around for so long and doing what I've done for so long that if you've got an average age of between 40 and 50, it's a perfect demographic for me.
Sure.
And yet a lot of them have never seen me live. A lot of these people who come on these comedy cruises don't really go to comedy shows that we think of, you know, that like the shows that we all do in town, in the centre, and comedy festivals and everything. These are people that love comedy on television.
Sure, they've seen you on TV before, but not.
And they've never seen me live. So it's like, can you imagine? It couldn't be better.
Yeah, yeah. If they've liked you on TV, they're going to love you live.
The best thing for us too is when they buy their comedy cruise tickets, they don't know who the comics are.
They don't know the lineup.
And so for us, it's wonderful because it's a level playing field. So I get out there. And it's like, oh my God, it's that guy! You know, they go crazy.
After I got off stage last night, because I mentioned that you were going to be on tonight, and a guy comes up and he goes, "You mentioned Bob Downe, that you were chatting with him today. Is he performing on the cruise?" I go, "Yeah," and he's like, "Oh, yes!" You know, so it's great to have that. You know, already you've got him won over before you take it out there.
No, it's pretty wonderful.
Speaking of winning people,
and you know the best thing I was just saying, speaking from a comedian's point of view. The best thing about these comedy cruises is there's always a hardcore of people that have known and loved what I do for such a long time. But about 80% of them, 75% or 80% of them might have seen me once or twice on Kerry Ann or on Bert or whatever, or on one of the game shows or one of the panel shows. But they're not huge fans. And so it's so healthy for you as a comedian to not be known by most of the audience.
Yeah, it keeps you match fit.
We all see comedians that only play to their fans, and it's not good for you as a comic. It's not good for you to only perform to your fans.
Sure. And especially too, having such a cross demographic on these ships too, it makes you, it keeps you matched fit.
I've found that it's really sharpened me up.
Yeah, great.
I've loved it.
Yeah, how have you found it then, going back doing festivals or touring in the UK?
You go back to where you've got your fans coming, and they are just like a party.
Yeah.
But this is really good for you in terms of your technique.
Yeah, sure. And it's great to see too. Like yesterday, you and I were in the markets in Fremantle markets, walking around, and we went up to get a coffee, or you went up to get a coffee, you ordered the coffee, and we're chatting away, and then you pull out your the card to pay, and he's like, "No, there'll be no need for that."
I know.
But the fact that you questioned it.
I know. I couldn't work out what's going on. He said, "No, you don't have to pay," and I went, "Why?" And he was like, "No, thank you for all the years of play." Like,
yeah.
This is the 40th year that I'm doing the character. Can you
It's
believe
incredible.
it?
But here's the thing with the character of Bob Downe that you do. he ages. He's ageless, really. Like, because I remember the first time I saw you, I was a teenager on the TV set in the crowd at off to the side, and the Denton show.
Oh, wow.
And the Amazing Jonathan, I was with him.
Yeah.
And he was on the show. And
this was Denton's 7 to the Tonight Show. They did
Yes.
the 7 in Melbourne.
Yeah. No, it was in Sydney.
I was in Sydney.
It was in Sydney.
Was it out at Epping or way out at Epping?
Yeah. And I'd never seen you before, and it was one of the most memorable performances I've ever seen. I've got it locked in my mind.
I remember that because I had the Hollywood Horns with me, a big band that I took to Edinburgh.
Right.
And they came to it. When I say I took them, they actually wanted to come to Edinburgh so much with me that they flew on Aeroflot. I mean, that's dedication.
Yeah, it's commitment.
That's dedication.
That's commitment. But I just remember that, just seeing that one spot, and it made such an impression on me that it was like, wow, that was like you encapsulated a whole. It was like a whole era of performance.
Well, that's what Bob is.
Yeah.
Bob's my reaction to all the television that I grew up with. Because when I was a kid, television wasn't really national until the mid-70s. So television was mainly local.
Right.
And live.
Right.
And so television started in Melbourne and Sydney with all the vaudevillians and review artists and so people that had cut their teeth on stage in the reviews and in the comedy, the Tivoli circuit and all that.
Yes.
These were people that knew how to keep the balls in the air. There wasn't auto cue.
Yeah.
They didn't have auto cue.
They were pros.
And these people not only performed on the Tonight Shows and the variety shows, but they also did the kids shows in the afternoons. So they would create characters for these, like the wonderful Joff Ellen. Anybody that's grown up in Melbourne would remember Joff Ellen, who was a wonderful sketch performer and a vaudevillian, but also had this gorgeous character. He was like a grown-up little boy called Joffa Boy. And we used to watch in the afternoon, we'd watch these vaudevillians, and you could see that they had to actually improvise the day's story, the narrative of the show, of that half hour. They knew where they were going with it, but they had to, it was improvisation.
Right.
And you could hear the crew laughing. They were being a little bit naughty and a little bit blue, but that went over everyone's head. So Bob is very much inspired by all that. And of course, in Melbourne particularly, we had Graham Kennedy, we had Bert Newton, we had Bruce Mansfield, we had all of these fantastic, Mary Hardy, we had all these fantastic personalities who were these amazing people who knew how to keep it going, keep it moving, be funny, be sharp.
If something happens that's out of the ordinary, bam, they knew how to write it and use it.
So Bob is like a complete distillation of all of that television that we soaked up as kids and teenagers.
Yeah, it's great that you keep that alive through this character.
Do you know, the other thing that's really funny is because it was retro to begin with, it's a bit like, because Bob is like a solo version singing live of a group that I started in 1980 in Melbourne with my friend Wendy Duwal and a whole bunch of friends. We got together and put on shows at our parties at home, and we were lip syncing old records because the
old record acts.
Well, the pop shows, when television was first on, the pop shows were young kids like Molly Meldrum and Denise Drysdale lip syncing the hit records of the day because there were no videos, right? In New York and LA and London, on Top of the Pops or on Bandstand, Leslie Gore and the Beatles were there. They lived there.
Yes.
They were on too. So that's what you saw on but we didn't have them.
Yeah.
We didn't have videos of them.
No one performed.
So the kids would get up and lip sync.
Yes.
These American and British hits, right? And so that's what the Globos was. And then when I went solo as Bob, I thought, I'm going to sing the songs that I used to lip sync. So I sort of taught myself to sing. But because it was so retro, it's never gone out of style.
Right.
It was retro to start with.
Yes. Yeah.
And as I always say to the audience, let's face it, I'm not getting any older.
I remember reading years ago, Sean Levy wrote a great called The King of Comedy biography on Jerry Lewis and how he got started off doing that, the record
He
act.
did.
With the old vaudevillian record act.
And he lip synced. He lip synced race calls or something? There was something like a race call.
There was something on the record.
I couldn't believe that when I read that.
Yeah. And before him and Dean Martin matched up, that's essentially was his act. The record act.
Yeah.
And he would tour around the US.
Lip syncing is such an interesting. The history of lip syncing is so interesting because you look at the earliest sound movies, the earliest 1928, 29, 30. When they were doing musicals, you can see them singing, and the sound is pathetic because all you can hear is clump, clump, clump of the dancers and everything. I'd love to know who was the first person, it would have happened in Hollywood, who said, wait a minute, let's record the songs, play them back through speakers, and you'll lip sync them. And then we've got a perfect way of cutting the numbers because they're the same recording.
Sure.
I want to know who was the first person to go, wait a minute, let's lip sync it.
If only there was a device we could
I'd
look
love
that
to
up
know. So yes, so the lip sync thing was how I taught myself to sing. Isn't that weird?
But there's something in that too, because I would imagine it enables you to connect with the music so much as well.
Oh,
through
yeah.
that. Because you're having to visually communicate what's happening.
Well, see, lip syncing is really easy because you don't have to worry about the vocals, so you have to really over exaggerate it to make it look like natural, which is kind of counterintuitive. But also you've got all the moves down. So I had all the moves down, lip syncing, and then as soon as I started singing, all the moves dropped away because I was completely focused on singing. So it took a while
to bring that back
for the moves to come back up, and now Bob is. So that's why Bob is how he is. He's like a drag queen. Who sings. So drag was a big influence on me as well.
Right.
Huge influence.
Tell me real quick, just as you're saying then with getting the lyrics down, what was it that inspired, like, you know, when you did
the slurring?
Yeah, and like when you're doing the Yeah song, and I just thought it was hilarious. Like I'd never seen that before.
Because I couldn't. It was because I couldn't remember lyrics.
So it came out of necessity.
It's
great.
Yeah. And then it became a bit of it became a trademark.
Right.
So it was because I couldn't remember a line, and I would just slur it until I got through the end of the line. And now I do it for complete comic purposes. And it's become the trade. They're waiting for it.
Yes.
They're waiting for it.
And even in songs, which is great, songs that everyone knows the lyrics to, and the fact that you're doing it, which just heightens the laughter on.
I do that in Route 66. Oklahoma City. Yeah. I know it's become such, and it happened by accident, as all great things do.
Yeah. It's not forced, natural.
It happened by accident.
Yeah.
And then I went, oh, that got a big laugh. I'm going to keep that.
What I really like about watching you on stage as Bob Downe too is how you're able to have you're so accessible and vibrant. And nice, but there's an edge in there, and I love that contrast of it. There can be some cutting comments, but it's not offensive.
He's because a little bit bitchy.
Yeah, but
he used to be a lot bitchier than he is now.
Oh, really?
And I used to pick on people in the audience. I hardly do it at all now. I do it when I'm handing out the cards, I guess. But yes, I sort of. I remember one time I can remember somebody saying to me at the box office of a theatre where I was playing. Oh, people were asking not to be seated in the front row, and it really horrified me because I thought, oh, I don't like that. Oh, I don't want them to be afraid, because that's the Barry Humphries thing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like I think I must have been inspired by Barry Humphries, and also, you know, when you first start out, you're very afraid of what might happen in a gig. You know, like in those first few years when you're working, and so often you see comedians who overcompensate.
They go too hard.
They attack first. They attack first rather than be attacked.
Right.
And that's a real Barry Humphries thing. And I remember thinking that time that was said to me, I thought, oh, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that. And I pulled right back.
Right.
I pulled right back.
But I've never found, like, over the years watching you perform, and you have like
it's softened so much. It was quite a long time ago that I decided to do that.
Oh, right.
To not be so aggressive with the. I used to, because Bob was a bit closetty too, and I used to always pick on the girls. Now I pick on the girls and then say, "Have you got a brother?"
Yeah, right. Nice little turnaround.
Yeah.
Look, when I think of Bob Downe, I'm thinking of Mark anyway. So it's like
that's right. It's
there's
really
a
me.
mesh. Yeah.
It's over the years. It's really me as my personal confidence has grown, and particularly being out as a performer and as a host, a radio host, television host, and everything. The two have really merged. It's really me with a wig on.
Right. And when you say,
although it's still a character, isn't it?
Well, sure, but it's an extension. It's an extension of yourself.
Me. Yeah, very much so.
Did you ever find when you say when coming out, like was it not obvious to people? Like,
well, no, because it was almost. He almost didn't want it to be. I mean, as hilarious as it seems looking back, it was almost like you didn't want to be too gay or too obviously gay in that same way that all of those closeted gay entertainers didn't want, Liberace, and
or Elton John and
Cliff Richard, all these people who's Cliff Richard's still in the closet.
Yeah.
And there was a real need to be in the closet because it wasn't acceptable to be out. And then on top of that, I went solo in the beginning of 1987 at the absolute peak of the AIDS and HIV hysteria.
Yeah.
And I was really skinny, and I think everybody thought that I probably had it as well. So I used to have horrible moments at TV shows and stuff where, like, Daryl Summers introduced me to Donny Osmond backstage at Hey Hey, and Donny Osmond refused to shake my hand. So, like, there was all that. So there was a sort of a almost like it was almost like an unspoken need to not be too, and that's what picking on the girls was about. But after I let all that go, I can't even remember what it was. A slow progress. It wasn't a moment where I thought, now I'm out, but it was just, I was sort of on that wave of people like Julian Clary,
yes,
of gay comics that were coming out all over the world, and just the gayness was the act.
Yes,
and so I suddenly
the embracing,
and I'd already been doing it, and now I just sort of named it. It's been an interesting trajectory.
And how did you find it in terms of performing after that?
It was totally freeing.
Was it relief?
Oh my God, it was totally freeing.
Yeah.
And now I do the whole gay stuff right up the top, particularly with these kind of audiences.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it is like for someone like me, like my parents, they were gay, and so from a young age I grew up. I'd spend the weekend over there. It was never, and like my grandparents, well, my grandmother was very religious, but loved Lewis and loved Richard, and it was all very inclusive. It wasn't so. I grew up with
very lucky.
Yeah, so for me it was never.
It wasn't that common.
Right. Yeah. But for me...
Now everybody's got a gay friend.
Right.
It explains what happened with the plebiscite.
Right.
Everybody has somebody gay in their family or among their wider family, among their friends and their co-workers.
Sure.
So it'll never go backwards. It can't.
Yeah, no.
And in a way, if you think ordinary straight audiences that have been seeing me on telly just think of me as a clown. They don't think, like a lot of those gay comics that were gay but not really out gay, they were just thought of as a clown. Yeah, the sexuality doesn't really come into people's perception of it.
Sure.
Until I get on stage and
it's coming.
Tell them.
But it's great to see, to see the amount of, because you went over to the UK afterwards, and the amount of success that you had in the UK was just off the Richter.
When I went to the UK, it was in 1988, and the Doug Anthonys helped me get my first couple of gigs, and they literally pushed me on stage. I was so frightened at the Fringe Club in Edinburgh, the one that where they could pour beer over you from the balcony.
Late night one.
Yeah, the late night one.
That's like going to war.
It was, and the act before had been literally bottled off. And so I was so terrified. Richard literally physically pushed me on stage for my first gig. And the minute I hit that stage, what I didn't realise was that those audiences had all of those Bruce Forsyth and Barrymore and all of these sort of high camp entertainers. I totally slotted into that.
Yes.
They went crazy from the first time I stepped on stage in the UK.
Fantastic. And that's a big thing. Winning over that crowd too is a big accomplishment.
It was ridiculous. And I did college tours. I did lots of colleges.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I had a real following.
But you had the whole TV,
you I did television the first time I went there.
Yeah. Performed for the Queen, the Royal Command performance. It's like a whole.
I had TV shows on my own in the UK before I had virtually any TV here. Andrew Denton was one of my earliest supporters.
Right.
He booked me on his shows, Blah 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 and Money or the Gun, and those shows.
Yeah.
So a lot more TV in the UK than Australia at that time, the late 80s.
So I think it's great that you experienced that era of TV, when TV meant something.
TV was it.
That was,
there was no
you
internet.
could make your name through that.
Yeah, and also absolutely. That's so true.
And also Bob is
a TV character.
Yes.
So he was perfect on a cathode ray tube.
Yes. And having working with these people, like with Bert Newton, with Don Lane, with these... Bert was such a
Bert was incredible.
I used to go and set the props for Jonathan, Amazing Jonathan, before he would do like Good Morning Australia. First time I did that, I'm in there setting up. Bert's like sitting like where you were. I'm putting stuff on the table, and he leans down and he goes, "Hi, I'm Bert. What's your name?" And I said, "I'm Joel." And he said, "Nice to meet you, Joel." And I just thought, just acknowledge me, The next time I'm back there, I'm setting it up.
He remembered your name.
He leaned in and he goes, "How have you been, Joel?"
He was incredible.
Right.
Bert should have been a politician because he had this unbelievable memory. And the other thing that Bert did, he would say, and Bob Downe's performing at the Continental next Tuesday, Wednesday, no show Thursday, but Friday and Saturday. Like he'd list
Total
dates.
pro.
Total, utter pro.
Yeah.
And in between, during the ad breaks and in the Moira bits, which were all pre-recorded, he would regale me with these stories, these showbiz stories that I was just, because he knew I was obsessed. Bert was one of those, there were the older performers really loved back then that were all still, that were all in their 70s and 80s. I would meet them and they would just tell me how much they loved the character because they could see that I was drawing on such old vaudevillian traditions. Because not only do we have the television, the local TV, when we were kids, old movies were on free-to-air television. This is before cable.
Yes.
So old movies, every Saturday, Channel 9 would play 3
in the afternoon.
Laurel and Hardys in a row, and then the next Saturday they'd play 3 Abbott and Costellos in a row. Then they'd play 3 Martin and Lewis.
I remember watching all them when I was...
We were just soaking up this unbelievably brilliant Hollywood B pictures comedies.
Sure. Yeah, that used to be like my weekend afternoons with my grandparents. I'd sit down and watch all these, I used to love the Martin and Lewis films. And I got to meet Jerry Lewis at a gym at a sporting house in Vegas once, just randomly.
How was it?
I'd read biographies on him. I knew that he could be,
scratchy.
You want to get him at the right moment. And so I went up to him and I just said, "Mr. Lewis, I just want to say, huge fan of yours." And he goes, "Where's that accent?" I said, "Australian." He goes, "I love Aussies." And 10 minutes later, we're backwards and forth having this great conversation. Just he was just very gracious. But it got to the point that, like an old conversation, I didn't have any more questions. He didn't have anything to say. And we're just looking at each other and he just leans in and goes, "Is our meeting over now?" And I went, "I'll leave you to it, Mr. Lewis." And then there was more to this. The guy, the gym manager came over to me and said, "I couldn't help notice you talking with Mr. Lewis. We'd ask that you refrain from interrupting our more valuable clientele in future. Thank you."
Yeah, you were told off.
Yeah, and I went, "Oh, okay."
That's so American.
And I was only a teenager at the time. A couple of days go past. I was back at the gym. No sign of Jerry at this point. I'm walking out, and I heard from across the gym, "Hey, Ozzy!" I turn, look, and there's Jerry, and he's saluting me from across the gym. The manager clocks this. And so I just walked by him and said, "Could you have a word with Jerry? Don't like being interrupted at the gym," and walked out.
That's great.
Yeah, it was, just to, there's nothing worse than meeting an idol and being disappointed too.
Donny Osmond. Even though he wasn't even an idol. He was still vile.
But here's the thing. I don't trust people that present themselves as too nice all the time.
Oh yeah.
He's got a bag of lime and a shovel in the boot of his car.
Phony.
Yeah, and which just shows it right there.
And he was in his comeback phase with Soldier of Fortune with all the leather, the black leather. It was like, who was in more drag, quite frankly?
Yeah.
Anyway, I couldn't stand Donny. I love Marie.
Yeah. Well, I think
I'm a Marie man.
I think they're still in Vegas. I think
they are. Of course they are.
Yeah.
Of course they are.
Have you performed in Vegas?
Yeah, I've done a few of the Flight Centre balls.
Oh, right.
The one at the MGM Grand that I really remember, and I remember going down from my room through the kitchen.
Oh, perfect.
It felt like I'm in Vegas, and I was hosting, and it was me, the Village People, and 10 Elvises.
Wow.
Yeah. Black Elvis, Comeback Elvis, Fat Elvis.
What, do they all harmonise together or what?
I don't know. They sort of elbowed each other on and off the stage.
The 10 Elvises. The 10 tenors, no, the 10 Elvises.
And all of these, all the Aussie fans, all the Aussie kids, all sort of, almost, and the British kids, they kind of stormed the stage. And when I came on, and the security were really freaked out about it. And I said, guys, you're freaking out security. You've all got to go back to your seats. And they all went, "Oh, okay." and they all went back to their seats, and that freaked the security out even more.
This guy's got the power.
Yeah, who was I? Tony Robbins. It was like some sort of cult.
Yeah, we thought it was Beatlemania at first, but then anyway, he's got some weird
cult
hypnosis
leader.
on these kids.
No, Vegas. It was pretty thrilling to play Vegas.
Sure.
That's for sure.
Bob Downe's like the perfect character. Comes out of a Vegas lounge. Come on,
totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
You've always obviously.
I love Vegas.
Yeah.
Been a lot. Go there a lot.
Yeah, I used to live there years ago with Jonathan.
I don't know if I could live there.
In a casino.
Oh, I don't know if I could live there.
Yeah, that was something else.
But I've never put a coin in a slot.
Likewise.
Not once.
Likewise.
Couldn't.
Yeah.
I always think it's so sad you see these people, these elderly people from all over America putting coin after coin into the slots at 5 a.m. and you just think, wow.
I'd get up in the morning and to go do my errands, and you just see these old people with the bucket of coins.
And you know that thing of you hear someone hitting the jackpot and you know it's fake.
Yeah,
you know that it's fake.
And it's right by the front door too.
And people, the staff are yelling, everybody's excited. It's just, house always wins.
Yeah. In the afternoon, coming back, seeing those same people still sitting there at the slot machine, it was.
God, I loved seeing Human Nature, but I've seen both of their shows.
Oh yeah,
wow,
sure.
those boys.
Yeah, they've
now
been there
there's
a
an
good few
example
years
of an act that the audience has no idea what they're going to see, and by the end they're standing and they're in love with it.
Yeah.
That was thrilling to see that.
Yeah, there are some real standout performers that go through Vegas, and it's and especially now there's so many more opportunities in Vegas, whereas before it was like you were a headliner playing a main showroom, whereas now there's little 150 seater, 200 seater, a lot more comedy clubs there now as well as
and the neon music, the graveyard.
Oh, how good's that? I
Graveyard.
love that. Yeah, and the old like downtown, going to the old casinos that are still untouched. You know, it's there's something.
That's
special.
where I want Bob to play the Four Queens.
Oh yes,
He could be the fifth one.
Yes, yeah. I know a couple of people that perform at the Four Queens.
Wow.
Yeah. It's,
Bob's the fifth queen.
Yeah, it's a very the thing that I can't stand about Vegas is the lack of preservation on a overall scale.
Yeah.
Like they'll just drop those.
Absolutely. I couldn't
classic
believe they
casinos.
blew up that beautiful original Caesars building, because that was beautiful.
Oh,
60s one.
Oh yeah.
The early 60s one. I know. But
The
it keeps the economy going, doesn't it?
like the Sands, like come on, look at the Rat Pack played here. Come on, what are you doing? They dealt
shocking, isn't
they
it?
dealt blackjack on that table.
It's really shocking.
I always thought at least keep the facade, build your megaplex behind that, but
Totally.
keep that for some people like us, we would go there. That would be the reason that we would go there, to see that piece of history.
But we're not the people they want.
Yeah. Yeah, there was the Sahara was that's where like the Beatles played there, like Johnny Carson would play there, Liberace, and
I saw they've just closed the Tropicana.
yeah, they're dropping that to put a ballpark in there.
And don't people pay money to watch it be blown up too?
Yeah. Get your tickets, get your popcorn and your
Kind of
tickets.
says it all, really.
Yeah. But when we were because Jonathan used to perform in that main showroom at the Sahara, and then they opened the new one. We're up in the new one, and they had closed down the original one. I remember going there, and underneath the stage, but underneath they started ripping up all the floorboards, but underneath were old posters.
Oh my goodness.
Of all the different acts that had gone
goodness.
through
Did
there
you
over
grab
the
them?
years. Nah, I didn't. Although when I was at the Golden Nugget, I was backstage in one of the old storerooms, and they had the old reel-to-reel tapes, reel-to-reel reels, not even the tape. And they had a player there, and I was there with one of my mates, and he was taking me through. We found one that had Frank Sinatra on it, 1984, and we put it on. It was like no one's heard this before. This live performance of Frank talking with the crowd in the showroom that Jonathan was performing in every night. It's just that history of that town is it needs to be preserved in some way. Now, you've always loved music. I know that. Records.
Grew up, obsessed with records from a very young age. Given records for my birthdays and at Christmas, and did that thing of we had little albums, little 45, like a photo album that had slip covers. You put all your singles in it, and you go around to your best friend's place.
Portable.
You play there. That's why I love Spotify, because that's what we do now with Spotify.
Yeah.
You play me yours, and I'll play you mine. And so we used to do that, and we used to. I can remember being about 8 or 9 years old, and in our little shelter sheds at Murrumbeena Primary in Melbourne, they had little tables, little bench tables and little bench seats, and they were all painted white, and the walls were all painted white, and we used to recreate Commotion, which was an afternoon pop show.
Right.
So because on the pop shows in the 60s, all the kids were on different levels. You know, they had podiums.
Right, yeah, yes.
And all the go-go dancers would be at different heights. And so we would put on, we had, you know, a little battery-powered record player, and we'd put on, I can remember go-go dancing and recreating Commotion to, you know, to the easy beats, you know.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 So being born in 1959, I remember the Beatles coming to Melbourne. I remember that's one of my earliest memories.
Festival Hall.
Well, watching the live broadcast of them on the roof of the Southern Cross, which was a really low awning, so with 100,000 kids screaming. So I remember that, and with my cousins, I had teenage cousins who lived around the corner, who were in their teens. They were sort of 10, 5, 6, 7, 10 years older than me, and their records. They had all, everything, the Stones and Beatles and everything. I used to listen to Sgt. Pepper's all the way through the year it was released when I was 8 years old.
Hearing that album for the first time, I would imagine would have been mind-blowing.
You got to contact high even as an 8-year-old. You know what I mean? You really did. It was like an oral comic book. That's what it was like.
Yeah, your imagination played. It's because I remember hearing that album. In fact, that is the album you picked as your favourite album.
I have picked this as I'm going to be like Molly. I won't let it shine on the camera. And this is a picture disc. And by the way, the first ever album to publish the lyrics.
Right.
The first album to publish the lyrics on the cover.
I didn't know that.
And it also had the fold out had cutouts. You know, you could cut. There was a Sgt. Pepper's mustache, and epaulettes, and all this sort of stuff.
And also, they spent more money on that cover than anyone in history had spent on a.
But this is a picture disc.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
That's stunning. And what other rock band could be possibly so big that they mention the Rolling Stones on the cover of their album?
Right.
And the cover, of course, is a classic. But the album is just. And you do have to listen to it the whole way through.
Yes.
So I remember this is my all-time favourite album. A very close second is Rubber Soul.
Oh yeah.
And I'm waiting for what's his name, Giles Martin, George's son, has been remixing all of the albums.
Oh,
really? They've restored them.
Right.
So they've been slowly going through the albums. They're going backwards from the. From
Let It Be through Abbey Road.
And now that the next album because he just did Revolver, and then the next one will be Rubber Soul, because the Beatles never listened to their stereo mixes. They weren't interested because they grew up in mono.
Sure.
They just wanted to hear what the records sounded like in mono, and so the stereo mixes are horrible because they've got the drums at the left.
Yes.
It was because stereos were only high-end hi-fi had speakers that you separated in corners of the room.
Right.
Stereos were. The speakers were in a big box, and so I guess they would throw the separation out so that it's to enhance the stereo effect. Listening on a stereo that was just one unit.
Right.
I think that can be the only reason I can think of. But anyway, Rubber Soul really needs it. The drums and the bass it really needs to go into the centre. And the whole reason why all these remixes started happening was because Giles Martin produced the Love Show.
The Love Show,
Vegas,
yes.
The Beatles' Vegas Love Show.
Yeah.
And he mashed them all up, and that is a genius album. Genius album.
Yeah.
Album.
Yeah. Did you see the live show?
No, I never have.
I saw it like 2007. I want to go see it before they change, because they're getting rid of the Mirage too.
Right.
Turning that into that's where it's been. And I'm going to be back there later this year.
Well, hopefully they might stage it around the world. Once it closes its run in Vegas.
It would be they could, but it's so immersive because it's happening all around you. It's like in the round, so everything's coming.
Well, of course, now with the hologram stuff, like the ABBA show in London, maybe they can do a version of the Beatles.
Yeah, that would be great.
Wouldn't it be wild?
Yeah. The thing with this album, which I loved, was how they took the competitiveness between, say, Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. Like he heard.
Well, that's right. This is their response to Pet Sounds. And Pet Sounds was his response to Revolver.
Yeah. So and it's great to see that there was and even like when they were touring, like with Roy Orbison, he'd be writing a song down the back. We got to write one as good as that, and him and Paul and John would take off and work.
And
this
is amazing. When they first were booked to play with Roy Orbison was topping the bill,
closing it.
And by the time that the tour happened, they had to stop. And they always talked about how cool Roy Orbison was about that. I interviewed Roy Orbison when I had a pop column.
Really?
Well, when I was a kid, I did my cadetship on the Melbourne Sun, which is now the Herald Sun.
Right.
And by the time I was 20 and 21, I had the pop column, the daily pop column, and so I got every record that was released. I went to every single concert and I interviewed every single pop and rock star that came through.
You would have been in your element.
And Roy Orbison was the sweetest, most gentle, polite, and it was before his comeback. He was playing clubs.
I remember...
This is 1980, 81.
Right. Because
he was so charming and so kind.
It's so good to hear that.
So
He always came across like that. There's a very sweet nature.
Kid, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great to hear that because...
That was a thrill to meet him.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Oh my goodness.
I see his posters are like, in Canberra. That's what I love about doing these old theatres, when you see all the posters of those who have come before.
Yeah.
And seeing Roy Orbison's...
And the walls where they signed.
Yes.
I love that.
And some of these walls, like, it's a shame the one in Geelong, which they had an old Billy Connolly, like 1980 Rebel Without a Clue poster on it, but they renovated the whole thing and just ripped the wall down. Like,
the old Tivoli in Adelaide, which is now Her Majesty's, they knocked it down completely behind the facade, a 1910, 1912 theatre, built a magnificent new theatre. It's the most beautiful theatre in the country, but they kept the breeze block wall with everybody's signatures on it.
Fantastic.
And it's incredible. I just get lost. I just stand there staring for hours at all these signatures.
Yeah. Who are some other memorable people that you were lucky enough to...
Oh, Bette Midler.
Oh, wow.
The Police, Sting. Sting was the most charismatic person I've ever... When he walked into the room, because he's about 6'4", he's like a god. And this was in 1980, 81, at their absolute peak. And I remember he had like an aura. He literally... some of these people literally did glow. So that was pretty wild. Liza. Who else? Thin Lizzy. What was his name? The lead singer of Thin Lizzy. Him.
Yes, I know who you mean.
He was the first person I ever interviewed who was, now that I look back, was obviously on coke.
Right.
Because I remember Phil Lynott.
Right.
And I remember thinking, wow, he's so happy, he's so up and energetic.
Charismatic.
Isn't he amazing? Totally coke to the gills. Billy Joel. Got to ride with Billy Joel in the back of the bus on the way from the airport into town.
What?
Yeah, while I interviewed him.
He was the first concert I ever saw.
He was so lovely.
Yes.
Bouncing around like a rubber ball. Happy.
That is
fun.
so good to hear.
They really love Australia, don't they? They love the fact that we're just such huge music fans.
Well, Piano Man was a bigger hit out here than it was in the States when it first came out.
No, he's great. Who else? Who else? Oh, Tina Turner, but again before her comeback. And I was the only person they'd set up. It was terrible for her. They'd set up this interview room with rows of chairs at one of the hotels, and she was on a stage on a chaise lounge with a microphone, because obviously her voice was giving her a bit of jip. And I was the only person in the room. And I interviewed her from one chair in a group of chairs, and she answered me on a microphone.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
How surreal.
It was, and again, way before her big comeback.
Big comeback,
way before.
Yeah. Have you ever thought of doing a one-man show as Mark, telling all these stories?
Well, I sing it. I do sing as myself.
But I know that. But like a one-man show more so, like keeping the music in it, but telling these great stories.
Well, I do sing as myself, and I do tell stories. Yeah, I do tell stories.
Okay.
Not so much those particular stories of meeting all those stars when I was a journo, but that could be a really fun thing to do.
Yeah. You already got a ticket sold out of the gates here.
Brilliant. So Sgt. Pepper's, that's the one.
Brilliant. Well, great selection.
And to have a childhood connection to it too is...
Yes. Yeah, I always...
I'm old enough to remember how excited we were anticipating each new Beatles single.
Yes.
Because each new Beatles record that came out was going to be like nothing anybody had ever heard.
Right.
And that has never happened
since.
No,
to be able to hear that.
And they did it 30 times in a row with singles.
Yes.
And they did it many albums?
The two singles that were meant to be on this, which was
Strawberry
Fields and Penny Lane.
That's right.
And how this originally was going to be like a memory or a childhood album, songs from their childhood or memories from their childhood.
When I'm 64, I think Paul wrote when he was about 16.
Right.
Yeah, because his dad had been in a sort of a Rumpty Tumpty kind of show band.
Yeah.
And so, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, they had a lot of songs. That influence to bring it into this album.
They had a lot of songs. Paul, I think, had a lot of songs in the bottom drawer. That he dragged out, particularly those vaudevillian kind of ones, which everybody used to look down on.
Sure.
Didn't they? Everybody used to look down on.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I've been reading George Harrison's biography. It's been fascinating.
Oh, that's who I got to meet, George Harrison.
Oh, George too.
When we were in the Globos, a film producer called Ben Gannon was trying to get a movie up about the Globos, And it was in the days, in the early 80s, when George was a really well-known, because he'd saved Life of Brian. He came in and produced Life of Brian, and so then he produced a bunch of big, successful movies. And so Benny was trying to get George interested in the Globos, and George wasn't interested in the Globos. Well, not in backing a film, but he loved the show. He came to see us at Kinsella's, and he took us all to dinner.
After the show?
He took all of us to dinner,
wow.
and I sat next to George Harrison. And I can remember looking, he got dinner for us, and I remember just looking at his gold Amex card, and it said, George Harrison. And he was funny.
Yes.
He would have been in his late 30s. Mm-hmm. Like by the time the Beatles broke up, they were like veterans in their late 20s.
Right.
And because they were doing the beard thing, I guess they looked older than they were.
Yeah.
But he was funny. He was taking the mickey out of the Maharishi, taking the mickey out of the Beatles. He was so down to earth. Well, like all people are from Liverpool. You know, people just, the further north you go, the more down to earth everybody is.
Sure.
They never, that's where we get that from, I reckon.
Right.
That sort of don't get tickets on yourself.
Yeah.
That's a real British.
Bring yourself down a peg.
It's a real British thing.
Yeah, which is healthy.
It's great.
And when you figure too, when you're George Harrison, you got nothing to prove anyway.
He was all over Kim, our most beautiful Globo.
Oh, right.
My friend Kim, that I did my training with at the Melbourne Sun, she joined the Globos. She was beautiful. And he was all over her, and he was flirting with her. And as we left, Kim told me that as we went down the stairs, he said to her, "Imagine if we run off together. Imagine the headlines. Beatle runs off with Globo."
That's great.
George Harrison.
Yeah. Whenever I do any gigs on Hamilton Island, I always go up to that little area where his house was on the corner and just look over the fence to try and see what I can see in there. Yeah.
So we've done the Beatles.
We're moving on to your favourite
my all-time favourite movie.
Look at that.
Now, a lot of people are going to look at this and go, and when I say to be or not to be, they're going to think Mel Brooks.
Right. Yeah, the remake.
Which is brilliant.
Isn't, but this, another level.
And I held off because this is my all-time favourite film, To Be or Not to Be, made in 1941. It's a Nazi satire made during the Second World War.
That's what's
which
incredible.
Is so weird.
1942.
And it's Jack Benny, who is one of my all-time, him and Tommy Cooper, the British.
Oh, yeah.
Jack Benny and Tommy Cooper, I reckon, are my two all-time favourite comedians. And Carole Lombard, beautiful and so funny. One of the only film stars to make the transition from silent to sound.
Right.
Very few of them did.
Right.
But she had this unbelievable verbal facility. She could rattle off these. She's incredible in this. And it's set in Poland. It's set in Warsaw, and they're as we start the story, they're Poland's most famous. They're a married stars. They're like
the Lunts.
They're like the Lunts.
Yeah.
They're the most famous Shakespearean couple in Polish theatre. Surely you know who I am. All that sort of stuff. And then Warsaw is attacked. Warsaw falls. Poland falls to the Nazis. The Nazis take over, and when the Nazis bomb and take over Warsaw, they're rehearsing a play about the Nazis.
Called the Gestapo.
So they've got all the uniforms, and through a series of unbelievable twists and turns, they pretend to be the Gestapo to foil a murder plot, like a mass murder plot. And it's outrageous.
The thing I love about this film is it's a perfect example of this happens. Okay, but then this happens.
You really have
when
it's a complicated plot.
Yeah, but just when you think, oh, they've got that. No, there's this turnaround. Then this turn. Like there's turns everywhere they go, and it's brilliantly written. Like,
and at one point, Jack Benny is pretending to be the head of the local Gestapo, and he's run out of material. So they call me concentration camp Earhart. And he's desperately trying to ad lib because he's well known as not being able to ad lib his way out of things. and it's called To Be or Not to Be because he's playing Hamlet way too old.
Yes.
And the wife he's got the soliloquy goes for 20 minutes. So there's a handsome young M, Robert Stack,
the
young
Robert Stack,
who takes To Be or Not to Be as his cue to go excuse me, and walk out of go backstage and make love to the wife. And so he starts to get really paranoid about it.
So he can never deliver the soliloquy.
He starts yelling the lines at him as he goes out of the theatre. And what's so really poignant about this is that Carole Lombard by the time the film was released, Carole Lombard was dead. She perished in an air crash on a war bonds tour.
Out of Vegas, going back to LA.
There you go. I mean, why didn't they drive?
Why
didn't they
drive?
drive?
I know.
Maybe the road wasn't as good.
Well, I think they were going to get the train because that's when the old train line was in.
Oh my goodness!
And her mother was on board with her too.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, and
it's Ernst Lubitsch who is this great
German
but sort of Polish German.
Yes.
Polish German director who escaped the Nazis. Went to the US in the 20s or the late 20s, early 30s, and directed a series of unbelievably great classic Hollywood movies. And this is his masterpiece.
Yeah,
to be or not to be, it's the original one. Now, the Mel Brooks one is really fun and funny, but this is a masterpiece.
The fact that was made, though, before we knew exactly what happened, too, in the war. Like, this is 1942. We're talking 3 years before Hitler was done. And it's a ballsy film to make during that time.
It's unbelievable that it was actually made.
And it's genuine. I don't know what it is, but watching that, when the Nazis come in, when Robert Stack lands in Warsaw,
really scary.
And my heart's pounding. I don't know what it is about someone pursued by Nazi troops. It's horrifying.
It's a thriller. It's a comedy and a thriller and a satire. It's just a masterpiece. And Jack Benny is just so funny.
Like, we all know he's known for his timing, but it's just brilliant.
And he and Carole Lombard are just
bouncing off each other, and then a pause, a moment of realization, and then continuing again. It's masterful.
Yeah, it's
like music.
Watching it is. It's very musical. Yeah, like all great comedy.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you suggested that. I hadn't seen that film until you suggested it. And it's,
Yeah. What'd you think?
It's brilliant. I loved it.
And you really have to concentrate on the plot.
You do. And it doesn't dumb it. It's got great sort of farcical moments in, but it's never dumbing down either to the audience.
And it's also a really fun portrait of actors and theatre companies.
Yeah, a great piss take on and the egos of actors and all the little
spear
talk.
carriers.
Yes, the talk backstage.
And there's one moment where the guy who's playing the king walks down the corridor and his crown, he's in costume and his crown hits the light fitting, and you can see that it just happened, and they've kept it.
Yeah,
and
just
he sort of half reacts. So there's a lot of it's a genius film, and it's a neglected classic.
It is
because of the Mel Brooks one.
Right. But it's interesting. You would think that would bring more people back to that.
I don't think anybody knew that there was an old film,
an original
called To Be or Not To Be.
And then they've done like plays of it, and apparently there's a musical of it that's been done.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, because when I was watching that, I thought, man, this would work really well as a play, as a live performance.
Yes, absolutely.
I think you've got your next play there.
Maybe. Oh my God, I'd love it.
How good would that be?
I could be the Jack Benny part.
It'd be brilliant.
Brilliant. Gina Riley can be Carole Lombard.
Yes. Yeah, it would be and it's a very it's a timeless. Like it holds up to this day. It's not like you don't feel like you're watching something. That's
everybody. The fascination with the Second World War will never
go away.
Never go away.
Right.
The Nazis are just like the perfect villain. Aren't they?
Yes.
Really.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that time, wartime.
Yes.
Around the same year that this came out.
The book is set.
Is your favorite?
That's right.
Yeah.
My favorite book.
For your favorite book.
My favorite book is Breakfast at Tiffany's by the late great. Sad, tragic, but genius American author Truman Capote.
Yes.
The book is written, everybody knows the film.
Audrey Hepburn doing the
That's
movie
right.
version.
Everybody knows this book because of the incredible, and it's a beautiful film, Breakfast at Tiffany's, with Audrey Hepburn, directed by Blake Edwards. But the book, you really need, if you love that character and you love that whole vibe of the book, of the movie, it's really important to read the book. It's a novella. It's not very long.
Right.
And it's actually, it was written he published it in 1958, but it's set in wartime New York. It's set in 1942, which is the year that Truman Capote moved to New York and was out on his own, living in a little cold water flat, trying to make it as a writer.
Right.
Because he'd been writing since he was a kid down in Alabama and Louisiana. He was basically raised by relatives, and what's beautiful about the book is that there's a couple of short stories with it, House of Flowers and Diamond Guitar, and A Christmas Memory. The Christmas Memory one is so beautiful. It's his memory of he was very close to their cook and sort of housekeeper, who was a sort of a simple soul, and they go foraging for he and this servant that he's very close to go foraging for the ingredients for the Christmas pudding, like the nuts and the berries and everything. So down in the south where there's no snow, and but the book could have been written. The book is breathtakingly contemporary.
I just read it on
She's
the
a
plane.
hooker. She's a high-class hooker.
It's great.
That's what Holly is. It's sort of, the movie had to sort of suggest it rather than say it out loud. And it's also very obvious, without it being said, that he's gay. And it's the friendship between a young gay man and a young straight woman who's on the tear, on the raz, seriously on the raz. It talks very honestly and openly and quite almost sort of shockingly for the period about homosexuality, about prostitution, but it's written in such a his prose style is just so. He's my favourite writer. He is my all-time favourite writer.
It reminds me a bit of Somerset Maugham's style of writing.
He'd be very happy. I reckon Truman would be very happy with that comparison.
It's
he and a lot of people. There's a TV series called Feud, which was just on recently. It's one of those Ryan Murphy series about Truman Capote with his friendship with all these wealthy ladies, these ladies who lunch, the wives of these movers and shakers, very powerful and rich men. These wives that he used to just hang out with at their, go on their private planes and go to Europe with them and hang out with them in their mansions on Long Island and everything. And they were called his swans. And he completely ruined his life by writing up their secrets in in supposedly fictionalized ways, but not fictionalized nearly enough. And he had this book that he was working on for the last 10, 15 years of his life called Answered Prayers, which he published. He never finished it, but he published the odd chapter from it in Esquire magazine, and it blew up in his face because all these women, these society people knew who he was referring to. And he was completely cut dead from that. And this being part of society was really important to him because his mother had been a sort of an aspiring socialite, but she was a sort of a very tragic figure, an alcoholic who ended up suiciding on pills and everything. And so he was an outsider looking into this world and wanted to be part of this world, but also chronicled that world. And the TV series Feud upset me a bit because it's probably a lot of younger people's first knowledge of who he is. And it shows him as being a really nasty old queen, but he wasn't. His biographer is this guy called Gerald Clark, who knew him very well all through that period, tried to dissuade him from publishing these chapters from Answered Prayers because anybody that read it was going, wow, what are you doing? These people are going to know who they are. And he pushed ahead anyway. And Gerald Clark gave an interview with The Guardian saying, Truman was a lot of things, but he was not a nasty old queen. He was hilarious and brilliant. And anything that you pick up to read by Truman Capote, you'll be entranced by it. He's an enchanting writer. And he's a sort of a seminal gay writer. His first novel's called Other Voices, Other Rooms, and it's basically one of the first gay, outwardly, obviously gay novels, along with him and Gore Vidal in the late 40s. And it created there was a photo that was taken of him lounging very kind of provocatively on a lounge because he looked like a 12-year-old.
But he had a boyish
but he's lounging on this lounge looking straight into the camera, and it's very kind of
suggestive and
homoerotic. So he became notorious at a very young age. But I'll give you an example of just his exquisite writing. Okay, can I read it for you?
Please.
This is the first time that he sees Holly when he's living downstairs from her in a walk-up flat in New York. I went out into the hall and I leaned over the banister just enough to see without being seen. She was still on the stairs. Now she reached the landing, and the rag-bag colours of her boy's hair, tawny streaks, strands of albino blonde and yellow, caught the hall light. It was a warm evening, nearly summer, and she wore a slim, cool black dress, black sandals, a pearl choker. For all her chic thinness, she had an almost breakfast cereal air of health, a soap and lemon cleanness, a rough pink darkening in the cheeks. Her mouth was large, her nose upturned. A pair of dark glasses blotted out her eyes. It was a face beyond childhood, yet this side of belonging to a woman. I thought her anywhere between 16 and 30. As it turned out, she was shy 2 months of her 19th birthday. Wow.
Yeah, everything you need to know.
Yeah. Truman.
Yeah, I read that. I read that on the plane on the way over here to Perth the other day.
It's exquisite.
It's great. Yeah,
and the way it talks so frankly about subjects that no one talked about.
Right.
In fact, when it was written for it was first going to be published in McCall's or one of those upscale ladies magazines.
Right.
And they read it and were like, "Are you kidding?" Because she talks about people that she knows. She lets her roommate think that she's a dyke to get rid of her.
Yeah.
All this sort of stuff. And it uses words like dyke and faggot and it's a great portrait of how New York just kept pumping all through the Second World War.
Yes, yeah.
That's amazing.
The city didn't
I think
stop.
it's time for it to be remade honestly as a film. And it's obvious that he's gay. But he doesn't he's very careful about that. Ironically, given what happened with Answered Prayers, but his masterwork is called In Cold Blood, and he invents he claims, and it's kind of true, that he invented the non-fiction,
the true crime,
the non-fiction novel.
Yeah.
So he tells the story of these horrible murders. These two drifters murdered this family on a remote farm in Kansas in the late 50s. And he follows the story all the way through to these two guys are executed. And it sort of destroyed him, really, because it became such an obsession and it took so long. And he couldn't finish, he didn't have a finish to the book until the
verdict or something happened.
And he sort of fell in love with one of them.
Yeah.
So the book, that's another book to read, In Cold Blood. And it was made into an incredible film.
Yeah, they did 2 films out of it. Yeah, there was the English actor and Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Truman wrote great pieces for The New Yorker.
Right.
Like he followed a black opera company touring Russia with Porgy and Bess in the 50s. And he also wrote an incredible profile of Marlon Brando for The New Yorker.
I'll have to read that one.
Yeah, when Marlon Brando's in Japan making Sayonara.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing portrait of Marlon Brando. So he was a fiction writer with a journalist's eye. He combined the two things in an incredible, unique, and brilliant way. And he was 5'2", and a funny little queen with this squeaky little voice,
quick wit,
who just could talk himself into and out of any situation. This is why the TV show Feud is not a very generous portrait of him, because he was incredibly funny and charming. He was the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest American writer of the 20th century.
Yeah.
He's my favourite.
Fantastic.
So there you go.
Well, this has been great. Well, I know that we both got to go and get ready.
We've got to do a show.
We've got to go do shows.
I've got to go and rest my voice. I've got to sing for the people. Luckily, it's mainly to make them laugh.
Yes. Well, I look forward to sharing the stage with you
tonight.
tonight.
Thanks, Jolly baby.
Thank you, Mark.